loud. Recording is starting now. Cool. All right. It should be all Gucci and good to go. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
Alrighty, Sean, would you like me to just jump in?
Yeah. I guess would the plan just be to pull up the GitHub PR that we've got going on here first?
Actually, I've got slides because everything gets done with PowerPoint, unfortunately. And yeah, so my thought was I'd give people a quick refresher. I'm going to go through this really fast, so if anybody's confused by anything, please holler loudly and we'll stop to discuss. But I just wanted to reset the stage and then spend most of our time digging into the text.
Oh, yeah, that'd be perfect. Because actually, we've had quite a lot of discussion on that PR at this point. So yeah, some slides as an intro would be helpful. Glad you did that.
So hopefully this is all visible.
Yeah.
So just a quick reminder of what this is about. Trying to get together a process where we can find and document consensus. Talked about this just over a month ago, and it's really very heavily based on the PEP1 process for Python, although it's been fairly heavily edited at this point. So where we are right now, that pull request was open about a week after we had the conversation on this call. I think I've done 3 subsequent pushes actually now. Had about 5 people comment, which is great, but it's a very small fraction of the community. And schedule-wise, my hope is that in the next week or two, by the time we get to AGU, we'll be done with the framing, so to speak, that after that point, we'll be mostly polishing and things, not doing any major rewrites. And then do a first vote for acceptance early next year, and then at the spring meeting, declare this official. And I'll mention this whole two vote thing in a bit. So what this all comes down to across several pages of detail is the process is to write a suggested standard. That might be something that we want the packages to do. It might be some sort of best practice. It might be how we run PyHC like this in Markdown. You open a pull request against the standards repository. Some folks called editors do a quick review, not to make sure it's good or right or perfect, but that formatting is good and it's appropriate scope. Have a discussion. Then we have either at a meeting or a telecon, a vote to approve, and then a second vote at whatever venue we didn't have the first vote at. And then it is good, but without any edits between those 2 votes. So, and I apologize, I do not have access to the chat if anybody's saying anything there. And the vote thing is a little bit weird, and this is probably something we can continue to discuss. The idea is to operate on a basis of consensus without anybody objecting. That objection has to be concrete, actionable, something that's theoretically addressable, and pretty much open attendance rather than having a set of people who are allowed to vote and others aren't. So the stuff we think we've got done is some nitpickiness of format. Do we do ASCII? How do we space list? Blah, blah. How we do the preamble, which kind of has headers on it. We'll just do a code fence for that. How we do internal links, we'll just embed the HTML in the Markdown. We talked a little bit about the standards. We kind of have a lot of people on as co-authors because they were present at the meeting and said yes. Intending not to do that for FEPS, just because it seems like it would complicate the process. And finally, doing some sort of separation between this process and the way it gets implemented. The idea being that if we have to rearrange how things happen on GitHub, we don't have to actually go and edit our process FEP, that we leave some freedom for implementation. So that's the stuff that's probably resolved. The stuff that's open, which again we can get to in the text, is the question of immutability. Once something is 100% accepted, voted, thumbs up, this kind of comes down to either we say, look, you have to replace it if you're going to change it, or adding some sort of revision process. What level of GitHubbery we want to have in there explicitly. and a template. I think the template's resolved. I'm going to go ahead and do this. It's just a question of at what point we think that the process is mature enough and the format that we desire out of these things is mature enough for me to take a template so that I'm not doing something that gets reworked. And then some open questions related to the implementation. As I said, the standard and the implementation were kind of separating. So there's a separate issue for that. It's that stuff like how do we, get this stuff on the website in an efficient way with a good index? How do we mint the DOIs appropriately? Tie them to a specific commit and a specific file in that commit, since the Zenodo GitHub integration is not quite so good for that. How do we do, DOI replacements? That kind of thing. So there's an issue open for it, and if folks are interested in DOI minting and or pushing around GitHub Actions, please do take a look at that issue because it's nominally assigned to Sean, but as with everything, the community kind of makes stuff go around. So I'm going to go see if I can actually stop this share. Seeing nothing in the chat, do folks have questions they want to bring up before we go digging into text?
I just wanted to make sure that everyone on the call was either at the first telecon we had talking about this PEP process or at least familiar enough with PEP and everything that everyone follows what's happening so far. If you weren't, I'm happy to take a break for a second and make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Jack.
Hi, Jonathan. Have you tried writing another FEP following these guidelines?
Ooh, I have thought about it because one of the things I've been thinking is that our standards document as it exists in one monolith should probably be broken into a number of this sort of thing. So if it would be useful to see that, I can do that. I've been torn between starting that with our standards and not wanting to be the guy who goes and rewrites all of our standards and says, "Isn't this great?"
I was just curious more on like the like if you found the process like going through it, is there anything that like it doesn't really matter what you
Yeah.
What you choose to do. It's more about this just defines the process for that, right?
Yeah, one of the things is that the intention was to try to make this thing itself bound by the same process it proposes
Okay.
in the bootstrapping. So I don't know if that addresses fully the thought.
I don't know either. So two other questions is the immutability, and so the voting contingent is just whoever happens to turn up.
Yeah, so
Is there should there be a minimum?
so let me pull up the text. Or actually, why don't we dig into that when we get to that point in the text so I'm not bouncing around. But the short is that if you're there, you can say no, but you can also submit in advance to object.
And also the short would be that there is a part in the document that says like a month out at least, we're going to announce that there will be a vote. So it won't be like, hey, surprise, there's a vote today. People should know in advance.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what, like, even so, like, everyone is aware and 3 people show up for whatever reason, is that still, is that still representative?
Let's dig into it at that point in the text.
Okay.
But it's, I would like to have some serious conversation about that aspect. So thanks for bringing it up.
Agreed.
Anything else? So I've thrown the PR in the chat so people can look at it. One of the things I've noticed, and I don't know if anybody else has seen this, I have found that opening that PR is really slow. like actually clicking on the link, GitHub tends to go for a long time. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's just me. But it sure
It
seems to have
opened
to think
fine for
about
me
it.
just then.
Okay. Because if I click on it from like our list of pull requests, it takes like 20 or 30 seconds to actually open.
Strange.
Yeah, it's very weird. All right, so then I will share screen and we can just start going down the text unless folks have anything else to bring up. Let me see if I can get a chat window open. Yeah, I have the chat open too. Okay, so good. I can see if folks say anything in the chat. Is this legible to people? Would they like to see it zoomed in a bit?
Maybe 1 or 2 zoom ins, but I can read it.
How's that?
That's fine for me.
All right. Hearing no objections, we'll plow ahead. And I'll go through this very fast and throw up a hand or a chat if there's a section you want to discuss. The header actually gets documented down further in, so we can skip that for now. This is just describing what the heck is it. And really, I think there are 2 core things I really want to underline. You know, this is how we're going to get standards, community input, and documenting our design decisions. And this is intended to develop and document consensus, so that we can, as we did with the standards, say this is something we think we can all get behind. And if you write one of these things, congratulations, you're responsible for handling the conversation, including the bits of folks who disagree with you. Motivation here again is the standards are about 5 years old. There's been talk of updating or imposing new standards, and we just want to be able to find some way we can move forward while still accommodating the fact that there's a lot of projects involved, a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different requirements, and we're not always able to be present for every meeting. Audience is pretty straightforward. It's mostly developers and user communities. I have a note that we talk about PyHC leadership in here a few places. Right now that's Sean and Julie, but the hope is that if we go to a steering committee approach or something like that, that does not require changing this process. It's just sort of who's wearing the hat for the things that are assigned to that. Go down, we've got 3 types. Standards track is basically if we're actually saying, look, a package must do this or should do this. This is where we deviate a little from PEP 1 because PEP 1 standards track is almost always actually like a change to the language. And I've tried to polish off anything on that, but it might not be quite right. Informational PEP, this is what I think about in terms of best standards, best practices. If you figured out a good way to do something, want to document it. So I can see a lot of stuff like, you know, good ways to do continuous integration, that kind of thing can go in there if it doesn't seem widely enough applicable to be enforced as a standard. And then process. So, hey, this is a process FEP. This is just how do we go about doing things.
So I have a question. Standards, what were you thinking of in terms of standards?
So for instance, we have the standard that all of our packages should be compatible with Linux OS. Linux Mac OS Windows, right? That's a standard. So that's the type of thing that we have in our existing standards. Let's pull it up. So all of this stuff, you know, a PyHC package must do X, must do Y, must do Z.
Okay, so a change to that would be like, so we're not going to support Windows 3, right? So you could change that to say like, could there be regular changes here of like when we go forward, when OSs come out with new versions, we want to drop support for earlier ones?
Yeah, so that's actually another thing. Sorry for the actually a couple of things. So Nick opened up these two issues on supporting new minor releases of Python and upstream support. I would be more dependency package support. And these are the types of things I would see addressed by standards track FEP. And it might include stuff like versions of operating systems, when we should support them, when we can or should drop support. I would not expect a FEP to say we support Windows 10 release 6, and then we have to put out a new one for Windows 11 or Windows 12 or whatever they call the next one. It would be more of a, we're supporting it based on these criteria that are fairly clear, and you don't have to be editing it all the time.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I would say this process just gives us a way to write down what our thinking is, because so far we've waffled back and forth on like making minor tweaks to the standards, for example, at like spring and fall meetings, but never pulled the trigger on anything. And here would be the place to capture actual language that we can commit to and gather consensus before making decisions.
Yep. So I've got, just right off the bat, I should put in an example in there to make it clear.
Yeah, examples help people.
Yep. All right. Jack, are you good to continue?
Yeah, fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So that was that. Applicability, this is, and this might help clarify it too. If it's a standards track, really, your package really should try to comply. If it's a core package, it's a very strong recommendation. This language could certainly be stronger. But yeah, it's basically, if you're a core package, I think there's also a talk of creating a tier of packages that are more strongly bound by the standards. So this is, if it's a standards track, it says must. You absolutely should do, unless you've got some really compelling reason. There might be things that turn out to not be applicable or what have you, in which case I think some flexibility makes sense, but generally it's going to happen. And really, to me, what it comes down to is this: if we've got a standard that the core packages can't agree to be bound by, then it's probably not the greatest standard. Ideally, these things should document consensus, not tie people into things that they don't want to do. Okay, informational, again, this is really just not binding, and then process obviously is going to bind us. And in general, I like RFC 2119 shell is awful, so is that. All right. So our workflows all happens in the standards repository in GitHub. So if GitHub goes away, we have to rework all of this, but so it goes. We have these hypothetical people called editors who are, Sean is serving as editor on FEP1. So you don't have any yet. Yeah, go ahead, Jack. Sorry. Or is that an old hand?
Is that my thumbs up? Did I goof you up?
No, you had a thumbs up, and then I actually had a pop up on top of whatever. Jack, your hand was for what you had just brought up.
No, I don't see my hand raised.
All right, I had a pop up saying it was raised, which was probably from like 20 minutes ago or something.
Oh, okay.
Apologies.
Yep.
So the idea is the editors kind of handle just, are things reasonably formatted? Does this all make sense? Does it hang together or not? Is this something we should do? And the basic idea is that the editors run their own ship. But if we run out of editors, then the leadership can appoint a couple of people so we can kind of reboot from there.
But I'm definitely willing to do a bunch of heavy lifting here at the beginning. Like if someone takes the time to draft up FEP2 and they submit it, I will be a very kind editor to work with and do a lot of the heavy lifting, since I understand this process pretty well at this point.
Yeah, and I'm happy to serve as an editor as well. So I think if if we seem to be moving towards this, we can people can throw their hats in the ring. I expect it's not going to be a huge amount of work. All right. Then we get into the meat of what actually happens. A lot of this is kind of suggestions. It should be fairly focused so that it's got one key idea. You need to have an author, and before writing the whole thing up, the author should poke around. This just has a list of like pretty much any place that we tend to hang out, which turns out to be a fairly large group of places, are good places to just have the initial conversation and see if it makes sense. Issues in the repository make sense as well, as Nick did earlier. And the idea is basically just to make sure that this is something that seems to be reasonable to move forward on before we do a bunch of writing, and also so that when the FEP actually gets written, there's as much feedback as possible incorporated into that. So once those conversations have happened, then submit a draft PR, and there's a lot of this, but we all know how to do pull requests by now. Hopefully, do a draft pull request. The editor just does a review. Does this make sense? Does this is the scope reasonable? Is everything in a reasonable format? If there's obvious little typos, the editors can correct that. Stupid stuff like that. But then otherwise, if necessary, they could bounce it back. But if it's reasonably sound, ready for people to start talking about, they assign a number, and then you can mark the PR ready for review. There's some possibility of doing a reference implementation for standards track. And what the reference implementation is basically just, if you're saying that PyHC packages should do something, having a PyHC package that actually does it is a good idea. So in that sense, it's a little different than the reference implementation for like a language feature. It's more of a, this is what it looks like to be compliant. And so there will probably be multiple ones of that. And then basically, we have a conversation in the pull request thread. The idea is that this is supposed to be the place where you can go to and see all of the discussion that's gone on, what people think about. That there's not like some sort of gag order on you can't discuss this in Slack, but if you kick the football around in Slack, somebody should go to the actual pull request and put in the basic information of what happened and kind of summarize that conversation. And the authors are the ones who take care of it. And in general, all of these discussions are subject to the code of conduct, of course. Right. So the editors, of course, can review this consistency, but the editors don't decide when something is accepted and is in force. That has to happen at across 2 votes, one at a Telecon, one at an actual PyHC meeting. You can't do edits between the votes. That'll reset the clock. And people need to know at least a month in advance that this vote is going to happen. And of course, the PR is open. And there's persnickety about what we call PyHC meeting. And again, the idea here is consensus of the people who are there. If there are objections, then those should be concrete. They should be addressable by the authors. And in general, we're all trying to work in good faith, even though we know good faith is not a panacea. So the consensus standard there is to leave things open that, hopefully in the course of that month, anybody who cares strongly will have a chance to take a look. If they have objections, they can register their objections in the PR discussion, ideally. And then it will hopefully be clear before you even get down to the vote that this is going to go or this isn't going to go, right? It should not be a surprise. It should hopefully be a formality, because hopefully people have had a chance to take a look, address any concerns, and move on. The reason for not having a quorum requirement is because then it has to get into definitions of who gets a vote. And it gets really wicked hard to say, who's officially a member of the community. We can certainly do definitions if necessary, but the idea is there's lots of opportunities to object before and leading up to the vote. So Jack, does this address your concern to some extent, or did you know that all already?
I don't know. I feel we could say 3 or 4 people showing up making the decision might not be the best. I don't know. Like if you decided to say like going back to the OS support, like we want to go back to Red Hat 6 or something like that, make that a requirement, then yeah, I don't know. It feels like it should be a little more there should be some like substantial community representation. Like you could have something like one of the major packages is at least one of the major packages signs up, right? Something like I don't know what the answer is, but like if you're just relying on people to show up, then yeah, I don't know.
Thing I would say is at the the meetings that we at least have in the spring and the fall, I've never seen one of these in the years I've been doing this where there was just a handful of people there. I mean, 20-ish or so is maybe a normal attendance for like a spring and fall meeting. We've had as much as 40 or 50 before, but at least everyone who comes on the telecons and stuff, I would expect to be a part of this vote. And I know personally, I would have a sense of if important people, like I have a sense of who in the community exists. And if I didn't feel like there was consensus in an idea as an author of a FEP, I probably could stall a vote or something like that. But my issue was just with complicating the text even more, because the process of how we describe voting here is already, I thought, fairly in depth.
Yeah, it's trying to be a simple process, but not necessarily explained simply. I think, Jack, if 3 people decide to get together and say, we're going to say everybody needs to support Red Hat 6, and they open the PR, and that's open for a month, and there's a vote going to be taken, and nobody says no in that month leading up, that seems unlikely to me, and it seems like we've got a problem at that point as well. People don't need to show up at the meeting to say this is a bad idea and should not be approved. If there's pending, denials from the discussion, then it can't go through.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Someone could come along and just make one comment basically saying, here's an issue, I hate this idea. And then we can't really bring it to a vote until we've addressed that issue in the PR, right?
That's the goal.
Okay, so the blocking is more or veto. I don't really want to call it a veto. I think more of a block, I think, is correct. It should be in the PR process, right, instead of the vote.
My hope is that the vote would be a formality where we all say yes to something that we expect to say yes to.
Okay. There's no requirement in here. Is there I'm just quickly scanning. Should the author be allowed to vote?
Since the requirement is unanimity, I would hope the author is saying yes to their idea.
Yeah, well,
And
let's say they can't make it for some reason.
do they need to be present?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
One thing that could help here is that I notice people can object in PRs. What if people can vote for it in PR? And that could be a way around the requirement of showing up to, say, a telecon to vote.
Yeah, I have. Did I say? I did not. I had suggested at some point. I've got to find where I can. Maybe that got deleted. That the GitHub review process of submitting an approved a review approving is a way of expressing support.
Okay.
I'll double check that that's actually in there.
Yeah, I like that approach because we're using GitHub PRs for the discussion, and they already do have a approve and reject feature. So if reviewers of the PR can just say approve or reject on the PR itself, I'm open to calling that a formal vote that could be counted in the tally at a meeting.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure we necessarily need to have a tally at the meeting, because it would just have to be registered as no objection. These people were present, no objections.
Good point.
There is a bit of a weird thing here, and Jack, this gets to your concern a bit, which is, as written, I set this out as you have to announce a month in advance, and the language has to be there. There's no requirement that there be no edits between that announcement and the vote. My thought on that was that, particularly if you're at a meeting, people will kick it around to discuss it, and there might be some things that people go, oh, we should change this, we should change that, and then it seems nonsensical to then start over again and go, well, we've changed that, so we've got to wait 6 months for the next meeting before we can approve it. It seems reasonable to say, look, we can do some small edits based on discussion at the meeting, then approve, and then there's the time for the second vote in case there are concerns about that first approval. So there's no changes between the first and the second vote. I don't know if it makes sense to have a requirement that you not edit leading up to that, or if just the 2 steps seems sufficient. Certainly, if there's a telecon that says yes, thumbs up, and then there's edits at the meeting before the second vote, there would have to be another telecon vote. Does that make sense?
So the idea is that there's so it's kind of held in amber until it's like there's no changes, last minute changes to the text before the vote comes up.
That's a possibility. Right now, you can change it up until the moment of the first vote, but then, as you say, it's held in amber between the first and second vote. If you need to make changes, then the second vote becomes the new first vote, basically. I'm also one. Go ahead.
I think that seems okay. Yeah, I think that's okay.
The 2-round vote thing also, I think it might be reasonable to say, look, we've got all of these chances to object, all these chances for feedback in the PR. Do we need 2 rounds of vote? Or do we say 1 vote's good enough?
Yeah, I considered that myself, but I kind of personally like the 2-round voting, especially if one is maybe like at a Telecon, just maybe slightly less of a big thing. But I like the formality of having 2 meetings where we've shown unanimous support. That feels like good evidence of community consensus to me.
Yes, I suppose it does give a more opportunity for like people who are, may not have been present. Like if somebody really feels very strongly between the first and the second vote, then they're gonna make all sorts of comments and whatnot, and then will show up and block the second vote, I suppose. So no.
I think at the point where after the first vote they come in and make a bunch of comments that, assuming they're valid and reasonable and addressable comments, that suggests that the thing needs to be edited, and then the process starts over.
Okay, that seems like a good check on there's going to be no runaway like we need red hat 6 and that situation's not going to show up.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
process is biased towards stuff not happening. Just to be clear. I think that there is definitely the case of if there's something that almost everybody agrees on and one person is very much insistent that it not happen and can't actually provide a good reason or something that's addressable, then I think that there is a bit of a problem that's not addressable. There's not a way to say the majority can override a couple of people who are really digging their heels in. But I think there's also a question of at the point where somebody's not willing to engage, then it does make sense for leadership to step in and mediate the conversation. That's sort of the escape valve that I had in mind if there's something that's almost universally agreed to be a good idea.
Okay.
And there's always the possibility of, if somebody's being reasonable and musts get turned to shoulds, hopefully that'll, allow things to move forward. All right, so anybody else have thoughts on voting? All right. So there's some general what it should be. There is this thing I'm probably going to update to go from to say explicitly, look, Pythonic is a term that should be interpreted in the context of the whole Python ecosystem, not just what we think. That's still kind of vague. So yeah, once it's accepted, if there's a reference implementation, it has to be finished. And then once it goes to final, then we're done. And then there's just a couple of bits and pieces of, what happened if it's not going forward. The editors can kind of push things. The author can transfer, etc. You can always modify it or withdraw it. Preamble needs to be updated with the status. You can replace FEPs. Sorry, let me open this up without. Doesn't work well in dark mode. So basic idea is to draft it. If it's voted positively, full consent, then it's accepted, and then it'll go to final if it either doesn't require a reference implementation or if the reference implementation is done, can be replaced. You can always reject and withdraw. Fairly straightforward. All right. Maintenance. This is another one that I definitely want to hear from folks. Once you've left a draft and have been accepted, things only get edited based on the implementation experience if necessary. But once it's final, it's done. And then you need to replace it if you come up with a new one. The idea being just to avoid see, did I have that? Actually, okay. Sorry, I'm going to jump ahead on that because it's laid out in here. Actually, no, tell you what, it's going to be faster just to defer that. So immutability is specifically listed as an open thing, so we'll double back to that. Okay, so these are all the sections. This seems more prescriptive than it is. You know, you should have all the stuff if it makes sense. It makes sense to put it into a dedicated section if you can, but doesn't have to. And again, FEP1 doesn't really follow this. But there's preamble, we'll talk about sec. A little bit of abstract motivation. What are you doing? What are you actually asking for? Is there backwards compatibility, security? Anything on how to teach, reference implementation necessary, reject ideas and open issues. I'm curious, I think we'll, with use, decide how heavily we use this. I don't think every time somebody has an idea that gets discussed and rejected in 5 minutes, it needs to go into rejected ideas. But some of the big ones, and then copyright will come back. Format, UTF-8, common mark. I'll write a template. Editor responsible. Okay, so here's the header. It's just a code fenced block with the number, the title, name and email address, and ORCID. I need to update that.
Oh, did that not get updated when we made that decision?
So it's in the description of that, but it's not in. So down here, we have the ORCID, but I don't have it actually here.
Good catch.
Yeah, I haven't looked at this, a bunch or anything. And honestly, discussions too, that should be explicitly the PR. And this is replaced, not superseded now. Wow, I haven't looked at this a lot. And this part clearly I have not looked at in a while. Yeah, so date created, posted, yada yada. Not too much here. Yeah. You can have auxiliary files. The idea is if you have diagrams or whatever, it needs to go into a subdirectory. Transferring it, basically just somebody else gets browse editor. Description of the editors. This really kind of sums up what we've talked about. Editors just make sure that things are reasonably well formatted and seem to be appropriate in scope. Explicit statement that this thing is going through the same process it's trying to be. Here's our rationale. Okay. Couple of rejected ideas. I was beating the drum for ASCII specifically, and Sean and Nick shot me down. Talked about this gets back to the voting. Do we allow people to sign on in some sense? And it seemed to make more sense to just capture who said yes at the meeting or who was present at the meeting where yes was said, rather than try to have a yes, I agree. Some source formatting stuff. Okay, so here's the big open one, which is immutability. Can you edit it after it's final? I'll say up front, I'm in favor of immutability. So you know my bias. Positives here are to keep the reference very clear, so you don't have rolling updates, you don't have version numbers. There's some impetus to really get things written well. And to me, one of the key ones is that we don't have to define some sort of update process. This is long enough. An update is basically treated the same way as something new. You just copy and paste the old one and work from there. And that also means that kind of everything is open for discussion. The downside of the immutability is that if there's something that's useful but small, is it worth the effort? There's just the idea of if this is a process that takes a while, does it make sense to be sort of starting from scratch or not? So I want to really specifically throw the floor open on this one. Wow. I guess I've put everybody to sleep at this point.
No, so what happens to the old FEP is still just line, just so there'll be FEP 1, 2, 3 will be replaced by FEP 4, 5, 6. So
Yep.
and
So
then
there is a spot in the header specifically to specify
okay.
that.
Okay.
And then when Sean has this all set up on the website, we'd shove them in a different corner of the website. There'd be, the list of final FEPs, but then the replaced ones would be elsewhere.
And that'd be just like how you could go look up the PEPs for Python and such. No different.
Yep. And I would hope that we could set things up in, let's face it, probably Zenodo, such that the DOI would have an indication of, this is a version of this, or this replaces this. I believe we can get that information into the DOI record as well.
I think I don't see an issue with this. I mean, other than like if you spell someone's name wrong or something like that, I mean, I could see somebody getting picky about there's a bunch of spelling mistakes that don't get caught. I don't know. So
Yeah, I'm calling that my job first and foremost as editor of these things, is to make sure little mistakes like that don't happen. If I end up doing a bad job of being an editor and that happens often, maybe we'll have a community discussion of how to handle that.
There'll be a FEP of like, let's get rid of the editor. That'll be one of the
And that's a good point. I might emphasize that in the editor's responsibilities section. But it's a pretty strong incentive to get things right the first time.
yeah.
Okay, and then finally the copyright. This is verbatim from PEP 1. Gosh, licenses are terrible. I'm not sure if the or here makes sense or if it should be and or whatever, but again, I'm just assuming that PSF's lawyers looked at this and thus we can just copy and paste it. And then what I added there is just the citation. I think if we say, look, legally we're in public domain, but then have the little nudge of, you should probably cite things properly though, and just have it right there. I think that's a good balance between being legally permissive, but still holding our community norm of citation. So in the remaining 7 minutes, is there anything people want to take a look at? Any questions? I've got a couple of notes from here and a couple of open things. If you've got time, there is a lot of conversation, mostly tied to specific lines. There's a little bit of open conversation out here. I try to make it easy to help you find the stuff that's relevant. So I've got a couple of little things to poke together and hopefully get a new upload in a couple of days. Once I've done that, I will let folks know via the usual means. And if you're feeling good about it, please do jump on GitHub and do an approving review. And if not, please, make comments. Let's see if there's anything I can try to address for you.
So I wonder if, like, how wide do you want to garner feedback from this. Like I could imagine posting this in Solar News, for example. And you know, just how like how far do
I
you
mean,
want
I
to
would
go?
say the PyHC community is the group of people giving input on this. If we would reach PyHC members by going to a third-party newsletter that we wouldn't reach by our official channels of like, Slack, Matrix, mailing list, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I do feel that people who have engaged with PyHC are the stakeholders here. It would be interesting, from the point of view of an improved document or doing things better, getting some input from folks unaffiliated with PyHC would make sense. The most important thing in terms of the people who have to live with it, I think, is PyHC. I wonder about running it past. I am completely blanking now. Leah's group that we had been talking about.
PyOpenSci.
Is PyOpenSci? Okay. If that makes sense. But I think the most important thing is that the people who have been, showing up to these meetings for 5 years or for 5 weeks have a chance to say, yeah, this makes sense to me.
So do you have comments on each of the major packages? Do we know
No,
that
and that's a
they've
good
read
point. I
read
can
it?
do an explicit invite to the core packages.
Yeah, we've sort of got representation from Plasma Pi, a la Nick, a lot on the PR. But yeah, I also agree.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to show like official support from the core packages.
I feel that I think that's appropriate. Like, I don't know if we should set up like are the core packages the equivalent of the UN Security Council? I don't know, but there are a lot of packages who are like just somebody's, essentially like they've got a nice little package. It's useful, but maybe they haven't updated it in a couple of years, and that's on the list. But the core packages are maintained more, much more regularly. So
Yeah, I would hope that the core packages don't become like a P5, just because there might be folks who are heavy users who don't wind up contributing to any of the core packages, but have really good ideas about how to use things and how to make things more productive for the users. And that would be a perspective that would be well worth keeping at the level of the input from the core packages, so to speak.
well, yeah, I think it's definitely worth, at least for this one, to contact the maintainers of the core packages, since they're deepest into these related issues, right? Of governance, of communities and things like that. So at least, I think it's useful to demonstrate, that PyHC have done their due diligence, right, in contacting people. So
yeah, I mean, I would hope that people on core packages are at least keeping an idea on the half an eye on the mailing list, but okay. So if people can just do a quick double check that their contact is up to date on their core packages. Like, Jim, you've been involved in this, so do you want me to get in touch with Eric, or can you carry the PySpeed S torch?
Yeah, that should be me because Eric is not actively working on PySpeed-S anymore.
Okay. So do you want to put in a pull request to update that as well?
Sure thing.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Yeah, no, we've updated some other contacts and other core packages recently. So if we did that, I would think they'd be up to date.
Okay. And Jack, I should be talking to Stuart for SunPy.
Yes. I think I saw that Nabil made some comments as well, but I think
Yes.
Stuart has definitely been involved in the SEP process in SunPy. So at least getting Nabil's eyes on it is fantastic, and I think just from the PyHC point of view of sort of saying like we contacted the people who are responsible, who we list as responsible for the packages, is also kind of just good practice, I think.
All right. So Darren, you'll expect a poke. And then I will contact Bob Weigel.
Thanks for doing that, John.
And honestly, I'll probably include Sandy on that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I will take these and initially fold them into comments on the PR, update the PR, email a bunch of people. Thanks a lot. I look forward to more input.
Thank you, John.
Yes, thank you, John. And I want to, I guess maybe it's closing remarks because we're at the top of the hour here, express positivity and optimism. I really like the direction of the document, and as pointed out, other groups like SunPy have already had their SEPs and their PLEPs and VEPs for a long time. So it's high time that PyHC gets their own, and this is just going to be one more step in turning us into a well-oiled machine that's actually making an impact on the community. And we've got big plans for how to use it in 2024. So I like that we're getting this finalized by the AGU timeline. So thanks, everyone. And I'll hang out for just a second more in case people still have comments or anything, but I would call this the end of the Telecon.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Cheers.
Thanks, John.